I went from living a nightmare of medication side effects and absolutely acute, horrendous pain and profuse internal bleeding and rushing to the bathroom 30 plus times a day to being totally free from autoimmunity and pharmaceuticals. The crazy thing is that my doctors never told me that this could be possible. And in fact, my doctors were some of the greatest sources of medical misinformation on my autoimmune journey. So that's why I'm creating this video. That's why I've dedicated my life to helping people find freedom from autoimmunity and pharmaceuticals, because this information is not out there in the medical community. By and large, it's not part of the medical industry. That's actually by design. I'm not saying your doctor is a bad person. I'm saying this system really is designed to turn people into lifelong pharmaceutical customers and surgical candidates. By divine grace, I found my way off of that medical conveyor belt. And it is on my heart to help other people know that that is possible for them too. So if you're watching this, if you are suffering with irritable bowel disease, ulcerative colitis, Crohn's disease, or really any other form of severe autoimmunity, I'm going to talk about the options that you have. I'm going to tell you things that very likely your medical practitioners won't tell you because they don't even know. And I also want to say at this point that nothing I'm sharing today is medical advice. I am simply sharing my personal experience for your entertainment purposes only. I was diagnosed with a life-threatening form of ulcerative colitis when I was 14 years old. And it started with symptoms that I thought were just a bad flu, and then it turned into really bad digestive problems, and then it turned into abdominal pain, internal bleeding, and needing to go to the bathroom a lot. So I was taken to the hospital. I was hospitalized for 2 weeks, almost 2 weeks. The medical practitioners there did a colonoscopy to confirm a diagnosis of ulcerative colitis. That meant that there were ulcers in my large intestine due to autoimmune reactions in my body. And at the hospital, during that first flare-up, I was pumped full of drugs, including high doses of prednisone, which is an immunosuppressant corticosteroid that's used often for flare-ups of ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease. I was put on very high doses of that, and then I was given prescriptions of an immunosuppressant drug to take when I returned back home. I remember the 3 things that my doctors told me during that first diagnosis. They told me that the best I could hope for was that my disease would go into remission with the help of pharmaceutical drugs, and that I would require these drugs for the rest of my life. They told me that if the drugs failed, I would likely require a surgery to remove the affected parts of my colon. And then they also said, not at this point, but in the future, when they warned me again about this surgery, they told me that, oh, by the way, this doesn't actually solve the problem. The disease often continues to progress to unaffected parts of your colon, so we might have to go back in after an initial surgery and take out more of your colon. And then they also said that nutrition wouldn't help me. They said, yeah, the best you can do is just gain weight when you're not in an ulcerative colitis flare-up, because during a flare-up, you'll likely become so malnourished because you can't eat. So you want to have some extra weight on you for nourishment. And then they handed me a pamphlet that said things like, eat milkshakes and cheeseburgers to put this extra weight on in case of a flare-up. So they sent me back home with all these different prescriptions. And thus started the nightmare of what I call being on the medical conveyor belt for ulcerative colitis. For the next 4 years of my life, I would be frequently hospitalized for flare-ups. When the flare-ups were so bad, then I would be put on prednisone again, super high doses of it. That would take about 3 months to taper off. That was a living hell. Prednisone is, if you're familiar with it, you know what I'm talking about, especially if you've been put on high doses multiple times for a long period of time. It gave me the moon face, breakouts all over my body. It put me on this crazy roller coaster of mood swings. I mean, I felt like I wasn't myself anymore. When pharmaceutical drugs start messing with your gut microbiome balance, the good and the bad flora in your body, that actually alters personality. Getting back to my story, I would have flare-ups that were super, super painful, internal bleeding, pain like I can't describe. Felt like 1,000 knives plunged into my intestines, and I would just be rushing to the bathroom 30 plus times a day. I was put on different medications in between these flare-ups to see if that would induce remission. Some of these drugs worked for a little while, but not in the long term. And those different immunosuppressant drugs also had a whole host of side effects. It was miserable, from bloating to the mood swings to hair loss. Clumps of hair were falling out for years. And so I got to the point where in the mornings I would wake up early and put brown eyeshadow on my scalp to hide the balding spots. I felt so helpless. It was this awful catch-22 because I believed that my only options to stop the flare-ups, which were putting my life at risk, were these medications. But I hated the medications. I hated them viscerally. But I took them because I thought I didn't have any other option. On the medical conveyor belt, maybe you're familiar with this, you'll be given medications that create side effects, and then you'll be given more medications to treat those side effects, whether that's over-the-counter medications or prescription drugs. What I didn't know is that there's no such thing as a side effect. It's a poisoning effect. The way pharmaceutical drugs work is they don't help your body heal. They don't fix the root cause. They just suppress symptoms. And what happens is when you suppress symptoms with chemicals, it creates more problems elsewhere in your body. So it's this brilliant tactic that the pharmaceutical industry has. They made this marketing term side effects. It's not side effects, it's poisoning effects. Every symptom you've ever experienced is your body trying to communicate with you how to get back in balance, how to change your environment, and how to provide it the tools that it needs to do what it does best, which is heal itself and rebalance itself. On my journey, I realized that my doctors were the greatest sources of medical misinformation when it came to autoimmunity. And that's not because they were bad people. I'm sure they were well-intentioned. They were just very ignorant when it came to autoimmunity. Why is that? It's because their medical education was bought and paid for by the pharmaceutical industry. So medical doctors, especially in America, they are experts in how to suppress symptoms with pharmaceutical drugs, how to treat side effects with pharmaceutical drugs, and when that fails, how to intervene with surgery. Surgery doesn't fix the root cause either. That is, in most cases, especially for autoimmune conditions, another form of symptom suppression. I also had no idea at this phase of my autoimmune journey that the medications that I had previously been prescribed in my life had very likely contributed to the development of this autoimmune condition in the first place. I had been put on various drugs early in my life. I had a lot of digestive issues growing up that then got pretty exacerbated, largely because I grew up in an emotionally abusive home with a narcissistic parent. It was a lot of dysfunction. So what happens in those situations is that the nervous system goes into an I'm not safe mode. It goes into chronic sympathetic activation. And that shuts down all functions of digestion, especially when that's a chronic state of being. So I started having really severe heartburn when I was 11, 12, and I was prescribed acid-reducing drugs for that. At that time in my life, I was also coping with the emotional abuse in my home through anorexia. So I developed an eating disorder, and I was feeding my body a lot of things that don't belong in the human body, like Splenda and Diet Coke and these diet foods that aren't actually foods. They're just chemicals shaped like food. So that also did a number on my digestive system and impacting the root cause of autoimmunity, which is intestinal permeability. I can discuss that in a future video because I want to go in more depth into that root cause. And then there were other pharmaceuticals that I didn't know were triggers for autoimmunity in the future. I've just talked about the acid-reducing drugs like Prilosec. Even over-the-counter drugs for heartburn can actually contribute to autoimmune development. I was put on antidepressants as well when I was 12 years old. It's a super clear case of medical malpractice. In fact, most prescriptions, if not all, for antidepressants are medical malpractice, because when we look at the scientific literature and not the pharmaceutical propaganda that has been disguised as scientific literature, when we look at the actual scientific literature, antidepressants are no more effective than placebo and are very, very clearly correlated to worse and more frequent mental health outcomes in the future. I didn't know that at the time, so I was on antidepressants for a while as a preteen. I was also prescribed antibiotics at various points in my life, including given a high dose of antibiotics when I was first diagnosed with ulcerative colitis. Antibiotics can be a huge trigger for the root cause of autoimmunity, which is intestinal permeability. Our healthcare system hands out antibiotics like candy, and patients are not getting fully informed consent about the potential future outcomes of taking these drugs. Patients are not getting fully informed consent about any of these drugs. My ulcerative colitis diagnosis came after a period of intense and significant stress. For me, the trigger was being in an emotionally abusive home, and things reached a peak. This is where the medical industry is so ill-equipped to help people, because it just does not address the root causes. The root cause of autoimmune conditions is environmental. The environment is, what are we eating? What are we thinking? What are we choosing? What do we believe? What relationships do we have in our life? What are our spiritual values? All of that is our environment. And people can find freedom from autoimmunity and pharmaceuticals, just like I did, by changing that environment. Pharmaceuticals don't change that environment. Surgery does not change that environment. People believe that autoimmunity is your body attacking you. It's like this idea that, oh, something's gone wrong with your body and now your body's attacking you. It's not really true. Nothing has gone wrong with your body. Your body is doing everything right. If you develop autoimmunity, it is making all these adjustments to keep you alive in its powerful wisdom in an environment that is attacking your body. So it's the environment that needs to change. And when it does, the body does what it does best, which is heal and come back into balance. Let me get back to my personal story and how I started turning things around. When I was 18 years old, I was bedridden. I had just dropped out of college because I was having such a severe flare. I was too sick to walk across the campus. And I was having a moment where I was wondering if it was worth living. I felt like I had no power in my life. And everything that I wanted to do, it felt like it was taken away from me. I mean, at this point, I couldn't travel, I couldn't continue school, I couldn't continue my hobby of dancing, which was my joy. I couldn't have a social life. I felt like I didn't have much of a future ahead of me. And in the darkest moment there where I was asking, is my life worth living? I did have a moment of powerful divine intervention. I've described it like the breath of God moving across my body. And I didn't get any answers in that moment. I just felt this space and some of that heaviness lifted off of my soul. And then a few days later, I found a book that changed my life. And that book is Breaking the Vicious Cycle. This is a book that outlines the specific carbohydrate diet. And that is to sum it up briefly, a grain-free protocol that allows the gut flora to come back into balance and allow the intestinal cells, the intestinal wall to heal. It addresses the root cause of autoimmunity. Now, to be clear, at this point in my life, I had already been gluten-free for years. I had been gluten-free and dairy-free, and those dietary interventions had not helped me. I was still having flare-ups. But when I did this specific carbohydrate diet, things started to turn around immensely and very quickly. Within 3 days of starting this dietary protocol, my acute symptoms were gone, meaning no more internal bleeding, no more pain. And within 3 months, I felt so good that I made the choice to taper off all of my medications without medical support. That was my own decision. I'm not telling you what to do. Because I was coming back into balance in my body, and I realized I can listen to my body. I don't need somebody else interpreting what is best for my body. I don't need pharmaceuticals in my body. That was such a profoundly liberating experience because I had always viscerally hated taking pharmaceuticals. The thing is, a lot of people do. A lot of people feel that way. But we take those medications because we really believe we have no other choice, and we really believe that we'll be healthier by taking those chemicals into our body. And you can thank some military-grade industrial strength propaganda from the pharmaceutical industry for that belief. And fortunately, more and more people are waking up and coming out of that slumber and that brainwashing and returning to actually listening to our body's wisdom to allow our body to do what it does best, heal. So that was a pivotal point in my life, which was starting this dietary protocol. And I started researching more about nutritional healing. I started implementing other aspects of nutritional healing and supplements. And then I realized that got me so far on my healing journey, but then there's a deeper layer that comes into play, and that is healing the nervous system, releasing resentments, releasing trapped emotions. That way, the nervous system can shift from I'm not safe to I am safe. I've been dealt some tough cards in my life in terms of forgiveness assignments. I've experienced the kind of pain and abuse that a lot of people consider impossible to forgive. But because I wanted to be healthy, I learned how to forgive that. I learned how to achieve a level of consciousness where the harms that had happened to me no longer had any negative influence over my life. And in fact, I transformed them into a means of helping people and bringing hope and positivity to people. So that really is the deeper layer of healing. Where people tend to get stuck is maybe they do make these important and fundamental dietary changes, but then they feel like they're stuck. They still have lingering digestive issues. They start to go in circles with functional medicine doctors and lab work and health gadgets and supplement protocols. And then they get to a point of thinking, I've tried everything, why isn't it working? They haven't tried everything. They haven't tried addressing the emotional aspects and the trauma and the nervous system dysregulation. And that's where the deeper level of healing comes in. And that is a necessary piece I have found in my own life for autoimmune freedom and pharmaceutical freedom. I see so many videos on YouTube about people living with ulcerative colitis, Crohn's disease, or invisible illness or chronic illness, and I'm making this video to tell you that if you don't want to live with it, you don't have to. There are options. There are ways to get off that medical conveyor belt, ways to be at peace with your body and to allow your body to come back into balance by changing your environment so that your environment is no longer attacking your body. That's my experience of real freedom. It feels like a divine assignment for me to get this message out, because it's not a message people are likely to hear within the medical industry or from their medical practitioners. I created the autoimmune class to support you on this journey to autoimmune freedom and pharmaceutical freedom. You can learn more at autoimmuneclass.com. I have a lot of resources there, including a free training on what your doctor won't tell you about autoimmunity. Thank you for watching, and here's to your healing.